And I think one of the things that's most underrated about passion projects and like how to actually leverage them into paid work is like very intentional direct outreach. Like if you know the exact person who you want to see your passion project to maybe lead to a job or an opportunity, how do you make sure just that one person sees it? And it doesn't mean they're going to say yes and automatically give you the job or opportunity. But if you happen to know that answer, I don't like to just put it on social media and cross my fingers that X, Y, or Z person is going to come across it. I try to figure out how do I contact them directly.
Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. It's the podcast for artists, makers, and content creators where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. I'd love to invite you to stop by dailycreativehabit.com. I have created all sorts of resources for you because I truly believe that when you create, we all win. So I want to see as many of you stepping into your creativity fully, closing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And I want to help you do that. So I've created resources like the Daily Creative Habit Journal. I've written a book, Make Fun a Habit. I have all sorts of free resources like this podcast and a Facebook group called Daily Creative Habit. Also, the paid membership for Daily Creative Habit, where we get together with like-minded creators, all pushing in the same direction, encouraging each other, and saying we're going to show up every single day to create something to get our work out there into the world. So if you would like to be a part of any of those things, again, stop by dailycreativehabit.com or simply visit my website, which is mikebrennan.me. Hey, today's episode is a real treat. I get to sit down with Chelsie Tamms, who is an artist, educator, and entrepreneur. She founded Lettering Works and does amazing hand lettering work in her marketing and design. And let me tell you that she has also just been a real shining example of someone who takes creativity, right, the amazing creative work she does, and marries it to strategy and business savvy. And through this conversation, we talk about the importance of having both of those sides. As a creator, you're a creative business. And so when you're trying to get your work in front of people, trying to get clients and customers, it's important to be intentional and to strategize about how to do that. And so today's episode is chock full of, yes, I just said chock full of information and inspiration. And I know that you're going to want to have a pen and pad ready to take notes, or take notes in your phone, or wherever it is that you take some notes. Make sure that you listen closely, pay attention, and take away some important next steps for you as a creative business owner. So without further ado, here is my creative chat with Chelsie Tamms. Well, Chelsie, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Mike.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you today just as a fellow visual artist, and to follow your story and talk about some of your process and the amazing things that you've been creating. And so before we get into too much, I always like to turn it back over to the guest and say, if you're at a party or you're meeting somebody and they're like, hey, who are you? What do you do? What's your usual answer?
Yeah, happy to share. So I think to give some context, I'd like to take it all the way back to April 2016. And that's when I was a senior in college. And I actually won $10,000 in startup funding from my university. So I really identify as an entrepreneur from the very beginning. I didn't think that was going to be my path. I thought I was going to be an advertiser and marketer and work maybe in Chicago or work at a big advertising agency. But I really bypassed the corporate world. So where I've landed now is just identifying as a lettering artist, a brand designer, and an entrepreneur. And that's typically how I introduce myself, just as an artist, depending on the group of people. Kind of lean more to the business side, or sometimes I lean more to the artistic side. But I find myself kind of straddling that line of being strategic and entrepreneurial and creative and very much a designer.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing. I mean, to win something like that, and that to set a trajectory for you, I mean, that's pretty special. Was there the kind of thing where it was a lot of people applying for this thing and fierce competition, and like what did that look like for you to actually have to do some things to prove that you were worth, winning this?
Yeah, great question. So, really remembering back, there was a handful of students that signed up for it, but not everyone finished the competition. So, I think when I think about like the fierceness of the competition, I really think of like the challenge of what the task was itself. We had to do like financial projections. I had no idea how to do that at the time. We had to put together an executive summary, a 15-minute presentation on our business model and idea and all these things. So I think the competition for me really came in the form of like, what is business? How do you start a business and not knowing that piece? But then the actual competition itself, I remember distinctly standing out against everyone else because no one else was an artist. No one else kind of came from the angle of like, I'm very passionate about this thing. Don't really know about business yet, but I think there's a potential to turn this passion into a career. So that really helped me stand out against the other more like business background, entrepreneurial background, which some of them had to do it for a class, or at least it started as a class where this was something that I kind of went out on my own outside of my typical coursework and was like, I really love lettering. I really love art and design. Can I make a business around it? So it was really leaning into that. And it was a tough competition just to get through all of the requirements. Like I said, some people dropped out at the end. Can't remember the exact number of participants at the end, but I want to say there was probably anywhere from like 5 to 10 teams or individuals. And I think most were teams. So I was unique in that I was an individual and I had my sight set on like, I'm going to do this business either way. I don't know if I'm going to start it right after graduating or if I'm going to work at an agency and build it up on the side. But I think that really helped me stand out of just like, I'm doing this either way. So if you want to give me the prize money, great. If you don't, I'll figure it out. And I think that that spark and that passion really excites people that are awarding funds such as grant funding and entrepreneurship competitions because you want to fuel the passion that's already there. And one thing that I distinctly remember from the competition that's really stuck with me over these 8 years is one of the judges said, I can't teach you, or I can teach you sorry, I can teach you the business side. I cannot teach you the passion. And so that really stuck with me. And I've found that to be true, even helping other artists with business of like, yeah, I've learned the business side now and I can teach that portion, but I can't teach you how to be passionate about your art and your creativity.
Yeah. I'm sure that that must have also instilled in you early on that sense of resourcefulness and grit that's like, I need to rise to these challenges and I need to figure out, even if I don't know how to do this, I need to lean into this and give it all I've got and figure out how to make the way forward. It reminds me of when I was in art school. There were tons of people that had amazing talent, but it was the same kind of winnowing effect where by the time we graduated, a lot of those people had actually fallen off because they didn't have the grit and the stick to itiveness, right, to keep going and to adhere to the various projects and the guidelines that were necessary. And so it was like talent alone isn't going to get you where you need to go. That certainly is a part of things and is certainly skill that you need to learn and develop. But I think that sense of having a vision, pouring yourself into it, going, I'm going to figure this out one way or another, and then just putting yourself all in on it. That's the stuff I think where really it makes a difference. And you're, proof of that, that you did it and you came through that. I'm wondering, so you start off on your own and right away you're like, okay, now I need clients, right? I'm starting a business. I won this. This is good. Yes, all in the right direction. But you talked about like straddling the entrepreneur, kind of business world, and then also the art and creative side of things. Did you find it difficult trying to make connections within like corporate or business when maybe because you didn't have a first corporate job or something that gave you a foundation of that and even relationships? Like, how did you manage to step into that?
Yeah, I think that's a very challenging thing to straddle and navigate is figuring out like how do you get your first clients? Like what does that look like, especially when you're starting not having a lot of relationships built? And really for me, it looked like making connections and relationships with the judges from that first entrepreneurship competition. I did some other activities outside of school related to entrepreneurship. So I started networking that way. I participated in a startup weekend that I joined someone else's team with their business idea. So I got some connections that way. There were a couple other smaller scale competitions in college that I participated in. So I just kind of looked to anywhere where could be my next client and opportunity. And then paired with that was really leaning into being an artist and figuring out what is it that I want to do in this ideal dream business of mine. So I really use that $10,000 runway to like give myself that extra flexibility of, as you're saying here, like you don't have clients day one. So sitting down instead of being like, how do I find a client right now? Asking myself, like, what does an ideal client look like? What type of project would I do if I could do any project? And that's where my love for creating different passion projects started because I gave myself that time to say, okay, if you could make anything, make it and go. And I started by making some different designs and products for Peoria, Illinois. And they didn't really have a lot by way of like postcards you could send to say, hey, I'm living in this cool city. Like a lot of that didn't exist. It's a very historical place. So there were like random artifacts and postcards from long ago, but it wasn't something that there was a lot of. So I sat down and said, like, okay, I want to make more community driven artwork. So I started there and then I was able to connect that. And honestly, the one of the funniest stories from getting started was creating that and figuring out like, okay, what do I do with these postcards? And I just happened to be mailing something at the post office, and the person checking me out there was like, "Did you write a book?" And it made me pause because I was like, well, technically, I made a book that's like a portfolio of my lettering work. It's called Just My Type of Lettering, but it wasn't really like writing a book. So I was like, I don't know if I'm the right person you're thinking of. Like, I did technically self publish and make a book. Um, and then I showed her on my phone this little sketch of like an ice cream cone that I had done because I love ice cream. So naturally, that was one of the first designs I made when I sat down and said, you can make whatever you want, go. And she was like, oh my gosh, my husband owns the ice cream shop down the street. Like, you need to go show him this design immediately. And then she looked at her watch and she's like, he opens pretty soon. So just take your time getting there and like tell him I sent you. And so I go over there and he's like, wow, this is so great. Like, you're starting a business. That's so cool. Do you have any Peoria postcards? And I was like, actually, and this was like when I was just getting started, like this was the precursor to the Peoria postcards. And I was like, I don't yet, but I'm kind of figuring out like what to make. Like, I can make them and bring them back. So I use that as kind of fuel for I might have a client for these postcards. So I just designed postcards as I would want them to be. No feedback from him. Came back with some samples and he's like, great, I'll take however many of them. I think it ended up being like a $200 order or something like that, starting somewhere. And I figured out how to print them. I brought them back. And it was because the ice cream shop had been a like tourism hub back in the day. So a lot of people would go to this ice cream shop and be like, do you have a map of Peoria? Do you have any souvenirs? And it was just that like legacy there that led people to ask that. So he had asked me that question, and that kind of became my first client and first foray into wholesale. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I was piecing together that like passion project piece of like, if you could do anything, what would it be? And the needs in the community and just meeting people, like connecting from the post office to an ice cream shop to making my first products seems like kind of a quirky story, but that's kind of how it happened. Just being open to fun creative projects and following that lead and like putting my own spin on it and not asking too many questions of that potential client, but just saying, yeah, I'll make something and bring it back. And he was all for that. He wasn't like, I want to see this, this, and this. He's just like, yeah, this little ice cream sketch looks great. Make something and bring it back to me. I'll buy it from you. And so that was kind of how it all got started. And I started building from there, saying, like, oh, there's an interest in these postcards. Maybe I can make other designs. And it kind of snowballed. And during that time, I had an artist residency as well. So I really split my time between being an artist and being a growing business owner and like knowing that you need clients to have a sustainable business. And I wasn't at that point yet, but that was okay because I knew it was going to take a little time to build that up.
Yeah. I'm curious, like you lean into passion projects, you develop this thing, right? And were there, because everybody always tells you like, think about the thing that you want to do that you really love, even if it's really weird or odd or whatever, like there's a market for everything kind of thing. But sometimes it's not quite as cut and dry as that, right? Like there are moments where you create something, you're like, this is a passion project, and you're like, cool. And then you bring it out into public and it's like either crickets or it's like the need of the audience. There's a mismatch someplace, right? Through you exploring these passion projects and the things that you want to do, obviously this story that you share is a win because there's a match and it's automatically like ushers you into an opportunity. But were there other things that you were creating that you're like, I'm not really sure if this is going anywhere, where this might go? Maybe there wasn't a connection. Like, did you have any experiences like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think not every passion project is going to be successful, but it depends what your goals are with it. So some of my passion projects I need to just have going so I'm creating still and that I'm kind of moving in the right direction. It doesn't always mean that they'll instantly lead to the paid work that I want, but I see them as kind of just a tool in this like toolbox of being an artist and an entrepreneur. They're different assets and resources that I build up. So the further along I've gotten in business, the more strategic I've gotten with, okay, why does this passion project exist? How can I connect it to a specific organization or person or goal? But sometimes you don't want to get stuck in the strategy. That takes the fun out of it. So I really try to kind of zoom out and zoom in sometimes and figure out like what would be fun to work on right now. And maybe I start a passion project that doesn't get finished for years, but it was just that spark of like wanting to jot down these different sketches or ideas is the fun part right now. And now it's just an asset that I have. Maybe an unfinished sketch here can be revisited years later. So I think it's a combination of really leaning into what do you want to be creating in the moment and just do that if you have the urge to do that. And then how can you step back and connect it to the bigger picture or plug it into other resources? So when you say like crickets happen, I've been there where you launch something, you think it's going to be really big and it's not. And I think what it comes down to is you just haven't connected it to the right audience. So there's a moment where you need to reflect in and really ask yourself, is there the correct audience out there? Am I reaching them the wrong way? Like maybe they're not on social media. And I think one of the things that's most underrated about passion projects and like how to actually leverage them into paid work is like very intentional direct outreach. Like if you know the exact person who you want to see your passion project to maybe lead to a job or an opportunity, how do you make sure just that one person sees it? And it doesn't mean they're going to say yes and automatically give you the job or opportunity. But if you happen to know that answer, I don't like to just put it on social media and cross my fingers that X, Y, or Z person is going to come across it. I try to figure out how do I contact them directly, whether it's an email or a direct message or sending something via mail if I know that person. That's not true for all cases. You don't always know exactly who's going to see your work and spark the next opportunity or the next profitable thing that comes from your passion projects and work. So I think that's something that often gets overlooked. People don't always think about knowing who they ideally want to see it. They're just like, I'm going to throw it out there and see if it sticks. So answering that question of like, who's the one person who should really see this? And can I start there? And then kind of share it with the masses as well and see who it resonates with. But if you know that answer, focus there first instead of just blasting it out and hoping the right person sees it.
Yeah, yeah. I love that answer because there's a fair amount of play and exploration in creating, creating the thing. And then there's also strategy involved in if you're actually wanting this to be something more than a personal expression exercise or just someplace that you're trying to work out an idea, to identify who are the people that I need to be in contact with. So I love that you encourage that action, because otherwise it is too easy for something to either be piling up where you're like, I did all this stuff, but it's disconnected. I don't know what to do with it, right? And so your idea of either push forward, connect with a person, or even use it as material to build on for other projects and things, because everything that we do can always be incorporated in some way. We're working things out. We're improving our skill. We're making connections. And so I think it's important to do that. And I stress that as well, just the importance of passion projects. I mean, that's been huge for me too. I've had things that have turned into self-published books. I've had other opportunities open up just because I got curious about something and followed that and said, what happens if I'm curious about this? Maybe there are other people who are curious about this too and interested, and then figuring out how do I make those connections. So I appreciate you just sharing your insights on that as well. Question about like your specific style of art, right? So lettering, right, is a very specific thing within even design. What led you to lettering? Like, what was the interest and made you go, this is something I really want to double down on and make mine?
Yeah, I think it really dates back to like as soon as I learned how to write letters, like in like early grade school, I always loved writing and loved letters. And I think that was just where like that spark started. At that time, I obviously had no idea it could be a career. It wasn't until much later that that kind of fell into place. But fast forward to high school, that was the time that I had some of my first graphic design classes. And I really didn't know how to use the programs because it was my first experience with them. But I had these like visions and ideas in my mind of like, oh, I know exactly what I want the poster to look like. So instead of going through all the tutorials on Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop and InDesign, I would draw exactly how I envisioned it. And then I would scan in those illustrations and lettering and then vectorize it in Adobe Illustrator and make my poster that way. So I like slowly learned the tools, but in kind of like a backwards way of like it all started on paper. And I think that that all stemmed from just my love of letters and drawing and like simple things like simple black and white paper illustrations that like made their way to the computer. So that's really how I got started. And by my senior year of high school, I really started to figure out the programs and was like, cool, I don't need to do this lettering thing anymore because I understand how to use this creative suite. But my high school art teacher was like, no, lettering's your style and your thing. Like it was what I gravitated towards all the time. And one of my favorite quotes around finding your style is if you haven't found your style yet, you probably just haven't created enough. Because if you had to create 100 posters or 100 of anything, your style will emerge. Just a lot of times we don't allow ourselves to create that mass amount to let it come through. So I had that experience not really knowing it, but then my teacher luckily pointed out like this is your thing, like you love doing this, you're excited about this, this is like your unique approach. So that really encouraged me to keep doing lettering and make it a big part of my design style, a big part of like everything that I created. So then fast forward to college, I incorporated lettering in a lot of different projects. And then I think it was about my junior year, I had an internship and I had put a silly little project up on my portfolio of just a bunch of like different letters. Like I had to draw, I think, 8 different of each letter, like uppercase and lowercase, for like a typography basic class in college. And for some reason, I put that on my portfolio. It was not the most polished project, but it was very like much one of those early passion projects and personal projects because originally the assignment was like clip things out of magazines. And I asked my teacher, can I like draw different styles? And she was like, yeah, go for it. And so I put that on my portfolio. Long story short, I ended up in an internship where they're like, can you just do this? They printed out that project and they're like, can you just do lettering this summer? I was like, I didn't know I could get paid to do just lettering. Like, this is a full time internship for a summer where I'm just doing my favorite thing. And then, of course, I did some other things there too and learned other design skills and whatnot. But that was really the moment where I was like, oh, this can be a full time thing. So I went back to school my senior year and was like, I'm going to figure out how to have my own business doing lettering. And over the winter break, I came up with the name Lettering Works because I like the play on like artwork and lettering and making that the focus of my business. And it all kind of grew from there, just figuring out, learning a little bit more about entrepreneurship outside of class, putting together my book. The book that I created was actually a project for an honors English class in college. I was supposed to write a research paper. I had a whole proposal. Then there was like a weekend in there that I was like, this isn't contributing to any of my goals. So I emailed the professor and was like, can I totally change my proposal and like write a book on lettering instead? And he went for it and admitted later on that he didn't know if I would actually accomplish it, but was like, what do I have to lose? So I created this book illustrating my process and my tools and a bit of my portfolio. And it all kind of built on this like love of lettering and leaning into, yeah, I just want to do this. So why not just like embrace that? And I know it's not for everyone, but I'm just one person. I don't need everyone to be my client.
Yeah. Is there a, a, um, a mix of people who come to you and say like, here's my need. I want to hire you. Obviously, I see something in your work that is making me come to you in the first place, as opposed to other people. But like the balance of just do your thing. I trust you. You got this. And other people who are like, well, we have these parameters, and what we really want you to do is here giving you some more information and holding the reins a little tighter. Like, what is your experience around that?
Yeah, great question. I think my experience has been I've had a mix of both. I gravitate towards the I trust you. This is your area of expertise. I see you as an artist. And I think that's really how I've tried to differentiate myself and like position myself with clients is like, I'm going to approach this very strategically, but also as an artist. So, like, I'm trying to make an artwork to represent your business, whether that's a logo or a poster or whatever else that I'm creating. And the more that I can communicate that and get on the same page with them, showing like, this is my style. I'd love for you to sign off on like approving of this style before we start the project. That's always ideal for me. And that does weed out a lot of people because I know that I can't do my best work if I'm working in too many parameters and constraints that like contradict where my like zone of genius and area of passion and excitement is. So I try to be transparent about that. But I also was trained as a graphic designer. So I have some of those skills. So there's been times where I'm like, oh, this project sounds interesting because of the content or because you can't always do 100% of what you love in ideal projects every moment of every day. So there has been a mix over time, but I'm always trying to kind of gravitate, move towards that ideal client that's just like, I trust you. This is your thing. We know that this style works for what we're doing. And one other point to that too is there are a lot of like corporate clients or different projects that would kind of from the outside seem like they need to be within their brand guidelines and all these different things. I try to find the projects within those companies that are kind of the exception of like, we're doing this creative campaign. And yes, we have to use these colors, but we don't have to use all of the fonts we've specified. Like you can bring in lettering because we want it to be different, or we're hosting an event and we need to differentiate, or we are providing stickers or a swag item to all of our employees and we don't want to just put the logo on it. So that's when I can like take that creative spin. And because of my background, I can like lean into, okay, what do we need to like retain here to keep it like on brand for your business, but also like where can we get creative and play and like really stretch those boundaries and like push things. So I really try to position myself as like I'm not here for every project. I'm probably not going to be a designer that's like on staff anywhere necessarily, but like call me in for the unique projects that you want to do something different or you have a bigger budget to like do something creative or something along those lines where I can like bring in my expertise and I know it's not me working hours on end, but I can come in, fit in for this project and like add something different that still stays on brand to what they've already got going on.
I love how you've carved out this niche for yourself and how people identify like, okay, we need to bring you in. This is the secret sauce, right? This is the unique element, like you said, and it allows you to stay in your lane and it allows people to see the value of what you do and where you're not just like all over the map and kind of going like, well, design is a broad term, right? There's a lot of things underneath graphic design and to identify early on, here's the thing I'm interested in, here's the thing I love, let me double down on this, and then getting focused on that and then becoming known for that and then sought after for that. I mean, that's huge. I'm wondering as you grew your business, right? Maybe think back to like, my understanding is you're probably working with a lot of small businesses in the beginning, right? Like that ice cream shop. And then in comes more of the corporate client, right? The bigger client where you need to push yourself to even engage with that client to try to get that work. do you have to learn how to speak their language, so to speak, or like what do you do to prepare for that type of interaction to make sure that you're proving to them that you're serious, right? You're a real business owner, right? You do this professionally. You're not just somebody kind of, doing this on the side or whatever. And that you're the right person for this job. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, great question. I think a couple things. One thing is kind of like dumbing down the art and design language to like get on people's level, like not trying to sound pretentious about terms that they don't need to know. I feel like I've lost some of my vocabulary in that aspect because I don't work with a bunch of other designers. So I just talk directly to clients, whether they're corporate clients or small businesses. They don't need to know all of the language. And like I'm doing the thing. So I think that's kind of piece one is just like, don't overcomplicate what you are doing, like make it make sense to them is the first piece. And then the second piece is also like just asking questions and understanding what they're looking for and how you can fit into that and bring to the table like systems and policies and procedures that support their goals. I think that's been a really big way that I've been able to differentiate myself and like show up as more of the entrepreneur and business owner that's taken seriously of like, I always have contracts. I have this process for how you'll review the designs. And I think a lot of times there's a bad stereotype around artists because we don't always have this clear cut process and some of those pieces kind of fall to the wayside. But I want to kind of go back to one thing you said earlier with the talent isn't like enough. And I think that's so true. And that's kind of a motivator for me sometimes. It's like reminding myself that there are way less talented people out there than either of us or anyone listening to this that are making more money because they've figured out some other piece, whether they found the right audience. I mean, not everything that's sold is perfect, beautiful quality and like great design, especially in the like world of design. There's bad design out there and someone's still paying for it a lot of times. So I like to use that as a reminder to myself of like, you need to learn the business and the communication skills to advocate for yourself and to charge your worth and all of those things. And then also focus on your creative skills and build those up too. But it's both pieces. It's not just either or. And the more you can kind of bring those two together, the more you can engage in those conversations and convince these different small businesses, corporate clients, or what have you to actually pay you and pay you a fair amount and make you feel good about what you're doing. And so it is dedicating a lot of time outside of the creative practice to figure out how can I write better emails? How can I have better calls? How can I communicate more effectively and speak to them? So it's not just me kind of blaring things out and hoping something sticks, but actually adapting and connecting and building relationships and all of those things that are the less glamorous side of owning an art focused business, but are very much necessary to make it sustainable and make it generate an income that you're proud of, that you're able to live off of, and all of those beautiful things.
Yeah, yeah, so true. I'm thinking about what you said earlier too about how, like, you mentioned cause-based companies and that being something that you've gravitated towards with the work that you do. Is there a reason why you're drawn to those type of companies or those opportunities?
Yeah, I think I've been moving very much towards like a values centered business in the past couple years. And I think that's because we all want to get meaning out of our work and what we pursue. So for me, at first it was like, I'll design anything that's like fun and lettering. And like now I keep niching down a little bit more, getting more specific of like, okay, what if it's that and a cause that I care about? And so it's adding and adding like what is important to me. And I think that really helps me make my best work because there's passion not only in the creativity piece, but also in like the content piece. So a lot of things that have been motivated by like just personal experience. So the values and the causes that I care about, a lot of them just like stemmed from me looking inward and saying like, what is important to me? Like, what do I think needs more attention and love and better design in the world? So a lot of that has revolved around kidney disease and chronic illness and mental health and just different communities, whether geographic or like just different identities that we have that I'm like, this feels overlooked, yet very important to a lot of people. So just trying to serve underrepresented communities and just like leaning into like, this is more important than insert whatever generic design I could be working on. And I think some of that stemmed from internships that I had in college, which a lot of the content that we worked on was like refrigerators and appliances. And like the design was pretty fun. And I liked the people that I worked with. And like there were a lot of great things there. And I got so much great experience. So I'm glad I did that. And now that I'm further in business, I'm like, okay, do we have to design for appliances? Do we have to
Yeah.
design for the biggest corporate clients? Like, I think I'm more passionate about the small business owner on the corner thriving than the large company. And you do make some like concessions with that. Like you don't always get paid the same rates as like the big corporate clients, but there's so much meaning to the work. So that's just, I found that to be more fulfilling for me and exciting. So it's just that like trifecta of can it be super creative? Can the people be nice? And can the cause be important? Like that's the goal. And you don't always need all three. And there's reasons to take all different types of projects, even ones that aren't super exciting to you. And you can still do a good job and provide great value. And it can be a great relationship and transaction. But my goal more and more is like, can we hit all three? Can we just make this
Mm.
dream clients and dream projects all the time? And it just leads for me, I feel like to my best work and like best relationships with clients because I care so much about what they're doing. And that comes through by me sharing more or giving more generously in other areas outside of the design that just builds these great relationships and builds projects that I'm excited to share. Not like, oh, yeah, I did that technically. I don't want anyone to see it because I don't really want to do it again. Like we've
Yeah.
all been there. And I don't think there's anything wrong with those projects either, but it's just a different way of like framing things. And like for me, that's like the goal. Fewer better things in the future, like just trying to continuously fine tune what I love so that I can bring my best work and do less work, but do more meaningful work.
Yeah. Along those lines, like how have you seen evolution play a role in your design and even just your approach?
Yeah, like the evolution of my style.
Yeah. Or just even like as you show up and do what you do, right? Like you don't want to just keep rinsing and repeating what you've done, right? Even if that becomes the thing where people come to you because they're like, "Oh, I saw this work. I love this work. This is yours. I do this again," right? How do you guard against that so that it doesn't become stale? You're growing and you're evolving, yet you're still maintaining, obviously, within the parameters that you need to, because that's why people are coming to you.
Yeah, I think it's just always having those passion projects on the side to kind of push my creativity and then being okay with some people saying, like, I want that. And when I see somebody point to something and say, like, I want that, because all of my work is like custom illustration and lettering and drawn, like, there is a different approach to a lot of projects, or there is something unique about each one. And I think just leaning into that and enjoying that process of like, some clients have no feedback and they're just like, looks great, it's good. So then that's where I step in and kind of challenge myself. And then other times it's more challenging and clients have a lot of feedback or a lot of things to work with. So I think every project ends up being really different. And where the evolution piece comes in for me too is like reflecting on every single project and really trying to get in tune with like, is this pushing me in the right direction? Do I want another project like this? Do I want to never have a project like this again, and kind of reflecting on some of those things and sometimes making notes, because I think we create so much as creatives and designers that sometimes like 2 years down the line we forget how like much of a nightmare a project was or how it just wasn't as exciting. But when you're removed from it, you kind of forget some of those little details. So sometimes I make notes in my phone of like, do not do a project like this again. I didn't like it for these reasons. So I think for me, the evolution is about like fine tuning continuously and embracing those challenges, but also noting like, actually, I don't like this because, so I'm not going to say yes to this opportunity next time. And as much as I feel like sometimes that comes across as like, wow, you're being so picky, I know that I can do the best work if I'm like super excited about the project. So I think it goes both ways. Like some people might find that intimidating or like, how can you be so selective? But I know that if I say no to some of those things that aren't a good fit, I'm making space and opportunities for the right fit to come along or space and time for me to seek out the right opportunities. A lot of times when we say yes to the wrong project, we don't have the time to actually find the right project that's now taken up our time. So it does take a lot of trust in yourself to like say no to something, especially if you don't have a better option on the horizon, to really like navigate that and kind of get comfortable with like sitting in the silence or the quiet or the waiting for the
Mm-hmm.
right thing. But I've really found that to be the evolution is like learning to get comfortable with the like ebbs and flows of like freelance design and small business ownership. Like it's very much like, in my opinion, has gotten better and better. But that doesn't mean there haven't been like dips where it's like, this is scary or hard. Like that is very much true all the time. But I think when you zoom out and you can say, I've gotten better at getting projects I'm excited about, of like aligning my values better, like that feels really good and fulfills me both on a work level and like also very personally. And that feels like the best evolution I can like aim for myself.
Yeah. Is there anything that you can think of that's like, this is something I would love to do that I've yet to tackle? Maybe it's a certain theme or certain cause, or maybe it's even bringing in certain tools or methods that haven't had a chance to really dive into yet.
Oh, that's such a great question. I think something like that I'm doing already, but like on a larger scale. So I have like lots of different sticker collections that I feel like I've gotten like some of the creativity out, but they haven't found like their home yet, so to speak. So like I'd love to work on a larger scale with a mental health organization and like connect the work and creativity I have to like a larger audience. I feel like some of the passion projects have been successful. They've gotten traction in my small communities, but like scaling that up sounds really exciting to me. So that's probably like a top pick. And then I think kind of similar to that, but like if I had to pick a new project that like isn't based on something I've already started, I think working with larger scale artists. I love being the one that can translate their passion and their creativity to a brand that like represents them well. And there's so much incredible talent in our world. So finding the people that are really talented but don't have like a brand to represent them well or don't have that like visual presence to help them get to their next thing. Like that's always so exciting for me. So focusing in on that and getting to work with more artists and creatives is, I think, the dream right now for me. But then always just leaning into some of those causes. Like I've gotten to do some really cool work in the kidney disease space, and that's been like so rewarding. So like replicating some of those things have been my goal for a little while. And I also realized like as much as like bigger is better sometimes, like it's not always the goal. Like I've heard some incredible presentations from speakers who have done the biggest brand rebrands and things you can imagine. And all I hear sometimes is like, oh, you didn't sleep for this entire 6 weeks or things like that. And
Mhm.
I'm like, I actually have really gone the direction of like enjoying self-care and time to sleep and therapy and vacation and all these things. So I've kind of whittled down to realizing some of these big projects and dreams like don't have to be the biggest visibility. It's just about finding that right match where like my skill set's a good fit, which isn't going to be to lead the largest rebrand in the US. Like that's not a fit for me. And there was a time that I thought like that's the end all be all. Like aren't we all striving for that? And in the past 8 years, I've realized we shouldn't all be striving for that because if we care about vacation time more than work, then you can't have it all. So like pick what's important to you. So on kind of a different way of answering that question is like the projects that support a balanced life and like a happy life are the ones that I want. And sometimes that could be true for the biggest ones, but sometimes it's the smallest projects that enable that and fuel that personal side. And I'm all for leaning into those as well.
Yeah. And it goes back to you knowing your values and what's important to you, right? And identifying here's what a win looks like. It's not simply just tied up with prestige or a big budget or things like that nature. But really when you know those things, you know what to aim at, and then you can do more of that kind of stuff. The thing I appreciate as you've shared parts of your story and parts of your process, that you are someone who is very intentional and thoughtful, and you have the creativity, but you also have the strategy. And I think so many times people think about creative people, they think about the wild-eyed, kind of like we talked about before, where it's like, are they dependable? I don't really know. And it's a little scary and a little unpredictable. And I think when you highlight the importance of bringing the strategy, bringing the thoughtfulness, bringing systems and things like that, that helps people understand like, oh, okay, you can trust someone who approaches creativity in this way because they are going to follow through. They have thought through things. They are intelligent in their conversation about these things and not simply just going on whims. And so I appreciate that you've kind of underscored all that throughout our conversation. And just as you've shared, knowing yourself, knowing what's important to you, your values, doubling down on your niche and saying, this is the stuff that's important to me that I want to do, the work that lights me out, passion projects, like all that stuff lends to not only your story and journey, but I think encouraging other people who are listening, who are trying to figure their place out in the midst of creativity, whatever that looks like for them, to pause for a minute, to be thoughtful, to be strategic, to ask those questions, to think about the things that make them uniquely them and the interest of that they have that they can translate into something that serves the people around them. So I so appreciate you willing to just come and talk about this stuff and underscore this stuff. And certainly just, I'm celebrating the fact of what you've done and the amount of time that you've done it, how you've launched well and continue to just take new ground with amazing new work. So thank you for being the inspiration on all those fronts,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for summarizing that so much more eloquently than I could have.
Well, I have the advantage of when I'm the host and I get to listen to somebody's story and I'm being curious and I'm processing as the conversation is going on, to be able to reflect back some of the things that I'm hearing and understanding and kind of doing that even for the listeners to be like, yeah, this is my takeaway from listening to this episode. This is something that I can apply to my journey, my context, because that's always my goal in having these shows is to talk about particular things, but there's also things that are universal for people that they can find that thread and apply their context to it. And then when I say this all the time, when you create, everybody wins, right? Like everybody needs to be creating, everybody needs to be leaning into those things that are them and that are uniquely theirs. Because when they're doing that, they're getting fed, they're growing, they're using the talents that they have, and then the people around them are getting to benefit because they're the recipients of all that. So I think you're just a shining example of that, and I appreciate that so much. You have also something that you want to give to the listeners today, a journal page that you've used even with your own business. Can you talk a little bit about that as we wrap things up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is probably the best place to start if you want to lean into, as you were just saying, like reflecting on like what's right for you and figuring out like what are you excited about and how do you fine tune at your own pace. So I have a journaling freebie that's downloadable from my website. And it really leans into like what are the daily, weekly, and monthly reflections that I do to figure out some of these things because it's hard to figure out what you want your passion project to be or what you want your next client to be or any of these things without asking yourself these questions. So I've gotten to a place after a long time of figuring out like how do I continuously fine tune? And for me, what that looks like is putting out a monthly blog post that highlights my wins from the month, kind of celebrates the entrepreneurial journey because, like I said, it has some highs and lows. So making sure that we're stopping and pausing and being thoughtful about what's going well and making sure that this is working. Because if we're not happy as a creative or as an entrepreneur, something needs to change. So I always encourage people to journal and document what's going well, even if it's the smallest thing you can imagine. So, this journaling freebie is all about unlocking your inner voice and taking the exact prompts I use. You can adapt them to however you want to use them and reflecting and making that part of your practice so that you feel like you have a little bit more control over where you're going and what you're seeking out. And that inner knowledge and just knowing yourself and knowing what you want can empower you to make decisions that are aligned with your values and aligned with where you want to be as a creative.
Yeah. Being intentional and purposeful the strategy piece that even you mentioned before, like all those things I'm hearing as you're talking about this tool that I think people really need to make sure that they get and utilize. So where can people actually find this?
You can find it on my website at letteringworks.com.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll be sure to put that in the show notes so people can just click and have easy access to that and follow along with the amazing work that you have there, and just follow along your story, your blog post, and continue just to track your journey, and to get in your orbit to make sure that they learn from you and just celebrate alongside you. So, yeah. Thank you so much again for today. It was really, really a pleasure. And I can't wait to see what you do next.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.